Before we dive into today's story, if you're enjoying these accounts from America's national parks, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really helps the channel grow, and I'm always curious, where are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments. Now, let's head to one of the most beautiful and mysterious places in America, Crater Lake, Oregon. I worked at Crater Lake National Park from 1988 to 1989. I know. It wasn't a very long career. Most rangers spend decades of their lives traveling from park to park, dedicating their careers to protecting America's natural treasures. But my assignment at Crater Lake ended after just 14 months, and the reason was something I've never been able to share publicly until now. This story needs to be told because people absolutely must know what lies beneath that incredible blue water in the deepest lake in the United States. They need to know that some places should never be explored, some depths should never be measured, and that sometimes the most beautiful things in nature are beautiful precisely because they hide something terrible. I came to Crater Lake in September of 1988. Fresh from a ranger position at Joshua Tree. I'd requested the transfer specifically because of the lake. You see, before I became a park ranger, I was a commercial diver. I'd worked oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico, done salvage operations off the coast of California, even participated in a few deep-sea research expeditions. Diving was in my blood, and the opportunity to work at a park with a lake as unique as Crater Lake was too good to pass up. If you've never seen Crater Lake in person, it's hard to describe. The photographs don't do it justice. The water is the deepest, most intense blue you've ever seen, so blue it almost hurts to look at. The lake sits in the caldera of an ancient volcano, Mount Mazama, which exploded about 7,000 years ago. The eruption was so catastrophic that the mountain collapsed in on itself, creating a massive crater that eventually filled with rain and snowmelt over centuries. The lake is nearly 2,000 feet deep, making it the deepest lake in the United States and one of the deepest in the world. But here's what makes it special. There are no rivers or streams flowing in or out. The only water source is precipitation, and the only water loss is evaporation and seepage. This creates water so pure, so clear, that visibility can reach over 140 feet. Divers describe it as flying through liquid sapphire. I couldn't wait to get in that water. My supervisor, Chief Ranger Martin Hayes, was a cautious man in his late 50s who'd been at Crater Lake for 20 years. When I mentioned my diving background during my first week, he seemed pleased, but also wary. "We do conduct periodic scientific dives," he told me in his office, looking at me over his reading glasses. "Depth surveys, water quality samples, geological assessments. But we're careful about it, Tom. This isn't the Gulf of Mexico. This is a unique ecosystem, and we don't want to disturb it unnecessarily." "I understand completely, sir. I'm not looking to joyride, but if there's legitimate scientific work that needs diving expertise, I'm available." He nodded slowly. "Actually, there is something. We're due for a depth survey. The last one was done in 1978, over 10 years ago. The USGS wants updated measurements, particularly in the deeper sections. Think you can handle that?" "Absolutely. You'll need a partner. Park regulations require 2 divers for anything below recreational depths. I'll arrange for someone from the USGS to meet you. They have a research station near the rim." That's how I met Dr. Ellen Voss, a limnologist in her early 40s who'd been studying Crater Lake for 15 years. She was brilliant, no nonsense, and had logged more dives in the lake than anyone alive. "The lake has secrets," she told me during our first meeting at the research station. "Unique thermal layers, unexpected currents, biological anomalies we're still trying to understand. Every time we dive, we learn something new." "What's the deepest you've been?" "Personally, 1,500 feet. But we've sent ROVs down to the bottom, 1,943 feet. That's the accepted maximum depth. Accepted? She smiled slightly. In science, we say accepted, because we're always open to being wrong. But yes, 1,943 feet is the deepest point we've measured, in the area we call the deep spot, roughly in the center of the lake. We spent the next 2 weeks preparing. The dive would be technical, requiring specialized mixed gas equipment and strict decompression protocols. We'd descend along a guide rope to various predetermined depths, taking measurements and samples at each stop. The deepest we'd go would be 2,000 feet, just below the accepted bottom, to verify the measurements. The weather in early November was cold but clear. Crater Lake in winter is otherworldly, the rim often covered in snow, while the lake itself remains unfrozen, steaming slightly in the freezing air. We launched from Wizard Island, a volcanic cinder cone that rises from the lake like a miniature mountain. It's one of the few places you can access the water, and it put us within range of the deep spot. Ellen and I went through our equipment checks twice. Everything had to be perfect. At the depths we were planning, even small equipment failures could be fatal. "You ready for this, Tom?" Ellen asked as we prepared to enter the water. "I've been ready since I got here. Just remember, this isn't the ocean. The water is fresh, which affects your buoyancy. The clarity can be disorienting because you lose depth perception. And the cold, even with a dry suit, gets into your bones after a while. Stay focused, watch your gauges, and follow the rope. Got it?" We entered the water at 10 a.m., the surface temperature a bone-chilling 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Even through my dry suit, I could feel the cold trying to seep in. But as we descended and my eyes adjusted, I experienced something I'd never felt in all my years of diving. Ellen was right. It was like flying through liquid sapphire. The visibility was so perfect, so crystalline, that I could see the guide rope descending below me for what looked like hundreds of feet. The water was so blue it seemed to glow, and looking up, I could see the surface as a perfect circle of light, impossibly bright and far away. We descended slowly, stopping every 100 feet to adjust our gas mixture and equalize the pressure. At 500 feet, the blue began to darken, the light from above becoming dimmer. At 800 feet, we switched on our dive lights, though the water remained surprisingly luminous, like perpetual twilight. At 1,000 feet, I started to feel it. That pressure, not just physical but psychological, that comes with being so far beneath the surface. This was deeper than most recreational divers would ever go, deeper than most humans ever experience. If something went wrong here, rescue would be nearly impossible. Ellen's voice crackled through the communication system built into our helmets. "You okay, Tom?" "Yeah, I'm good. This is incredible. Wait until we get to 1,500. That's when it starts to feel truly alien." She wasn't wrong. As we descended past 1,200 feet, the quality of the water seemed to change. It was still impossibly clear, but the blue had deepened to something almost black. And in the beam of my dive light, I started to see particles suspended in the water. Not dirt or algae, but something else, something that glittered and danced in the light like snow. "What is that?" I asked, watching the particles swirl around us. "Diatoms and other microscopic life. They exist in layers throughout the lake, part of the unique ecosystem. Beautiful, isn't it?" At 1,500 feet, we paused for a longer stop. According to our depth gauges, we were still 443 feet above the bottom. The rope continued down into the darkness below, disappearing from sight even with our powerful lights. "Everything checks out so far," Ellen said, reviewing her instruments. "Water temperature, clarity, chemical composition, all within expected parameters. Let's continue to 2,000 and verify the bottom measurement." We descended again, slower now, watching our gas mixture carefully. At 1,700 feet, I noticed something odd. The rope, which had been perfectly straight throughout our descent, seemed to be vibrating slightly, as if something far below was tugging on it. "Ellen, are you seeing this?" "Seeing what?" "The rope." "It's moving." She focused her light on the guide rope. For a moment, it looked still. Then I saw it again, a subtle tremor running up the length. "Probably just current," she said, but I heard uncertainty in her voice. "There are thermal layers down here that can create unexpected water movement." At 1,800 feet, my light caught something metallic glinting in the darkness. I angled toward it, Ellen following. Attached to a rock outcropping, about 15 feet from our guide rope, was a metal plate. It was badly corroded, covered in mineral deposits, but I could still make out numbers stamped into the surface. 1800 FT-1952. "Ellen, look at this." She swam closer, examining the plate. "What the hell?" "This is a depth marker." "From 1952? Was there a survey that year?" "Not that I know of. Let me check my records when we surface." "But Tom, if this is from 1952, why is it only at 1,800 feet? The lake depth was already known to be deeper than this. Maybe it's not measuring the lake depth. Maybe it's measuring something else." We continued down, and at 1,900 feet, I found another marker. 1,900 feet to 1952. This one was in better condition, the numbers clearer, and beneath the depth marking was something else. Words stamped in smaller letters. "Do not proceed." "Ellen, we need to surface. Now." "Tom, we're almost at 2,000. We're so close to verifying the measurements." "Look at this marker. It says, 'Do not proceed.' Someone put these here as a warning." She examined the marker, and I saw her frown through her diving mask. "That doesn't make sense. Why would there be a warning at this depth? We're still above the accepted bottom." "I don't know, but I don't think we should ignore it. Tom, we've come all this way. We have the equipment, the gas mixture, everything we need. Just a little further. Don't you want to know what's down there? I did. God help me, I did." Curiosity is a powerful thing, especially for someone who spent their life exploring the depths. But something about those markers, about the warning, made my instincts scream danger. 100 more feet, I said finally. To 2,000. Then we surface, regardless of what we find. Agreed. We descended those final 100 feet slowly, our lights cutting through the darkness. At 1,950 feet, I expected to see the bottom, the lake bed rising up to meet us. Instead, the darkness simply continued, deeper and deeper, the guide rope vanishing into an abyss that seemed to have no end. "That's impossible," Ellen whispered. "The bottom is at 1,943 feet. We should see it. We should be practically standing on it." I checked my depth gauge. 2,000 feet exactly. I looked down, shining my light as far as it would reach. Nothing. Just black water and that guide rope, descending into infinity. "Ellen, there's something wrong with our instruments. We need to ascend," and that's when I saw it. Far below, much deeper than should have been possible, I saw light. Not the beam of a dive light, but something else, a soft, pulsing bioluminescence, blue-green and alien, moving in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. "Are you seeing that?" I asked. "Yes, but that's—" "Tom, there's nothing in this lake that produces bioluminescence. It's too cold, too isolated. The ecosystem doesn't support those types of organisms." The light pulsed again, brighter this time, and I realized the patterns weren't random. They were repeating like a signal or a message or a warning. "We're leaving." Now. I grabbed Ellen's arm and started ascending, following our decompression schedule but moving as quickly as safety allowed. As we rose, I kept looking down, watching that bioluminescent light. It was following us, rising with us, staying about 200 feet below. At 1900 feet, we passed the second marker, the one that said, "Do not proceed." In my light, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Scratched into the metal, in rough, hurried letters, "They are below." Ellen, did you see that? See what? The marker. Someone scratched a message. It said, The rope jerked violently, nearly pulling me off my grip. Ellen screamed through the comm system, and I looked down to see the bioluminescent light surging upward, not slowly, but fast, impossibly fast, like something massive was rising from the depths. "Go!" I shouted. "Forget decompression, just go." We kicked hard, ascending faster than we should have, faster than was safe, but the alternative was worse. The light was gaining on us, and now I could see that it wasn't one light but many, hundreds of glowing points moving in coordinated swarms. At 1500 feet the rope jerked again, so hard this time that the entire line went slack. Our guide rope, our lifeline to the surface, had been severed or detached from below. "We're free swimming," Ellen shouted. "Look for the surface light, head straight up." I looked up and saw that distant circle of daylight over 1400 feet above us. We kicked and kicked, our breathing loud and harsh in our helmets, the bioluminescent light still rising below us. At 1000 feet I risked a look back. The lights had stopped following. They hovered around 1200 feet, pulsing and swirling, and for just a moment they arranged themselves into a pattern that looked almost like words, or symbols, or a map. Then they descended, dropping back into the darkness, and were gone. We didn't stop until we broke the surface, gasping and disoriented, the sudden brightness of daylight blinding after so long in the depths. The support boat was there immediately, pulling us out of the water. "What happened?" the boat operator demanded. "You came up way too fast. Are you okay? Do you need medical?" Ellen and I looked at each other, still breathing hard, still processing what we'd seen. "The rope broke," I said finally. "We had to make an emergency ascent." It was a lie, but it was easier than the truth. How could I explain what we'd seen? Lights in a depth that shouldn't exist. In a lake that was supposed to end at 1943 feet, but clearly continued much, much deeper. Back at the research station, we went through post-dive protocols, checking for decompression sickness, reviewing our gas mixture, examining our equipment. Everything was normal, except for one thing. Our depth gauges, the electronic instruments that should have provided precise measurements, had both malfunctioned at exactly 2000 feet. According to the recorded data, we'd never gone deeper than that, but I knew what I'd seen. The rope had continued down, far past where the bottom should have been. "What do we tell Martin?" Ellen asked, as we sat in the station, drinking coffee to warm up. "The truth. The guide rope failed. The instruments malfunctioned. We completed the survey to 2000 feet and verified that the accepted depth measurements are accurate. But that's not what we saw." "I know, but without data, without proof, what can we tell him? That the lake is deeper than we thought? That there are bioluminescent organisms that shouldn't exist? That someone in 1952 put warning markers down there?" Ellen was quiet for a long moment. "We need to find out about those 1952 markers. Who put them there and why? There must be records, reports, something." "Agreed. But Ellen, I think we need to be very careful about this. Those markers were a warning. Someone went down there before us and felt the need to tell others not to follow. We should probably listen to that warning. Or we should understand what they were warning us about." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those bioluminescent lights, kept feeling the jerk of the rope as something severed it from below, kept thinking about that message scratched on the marker. They are below. Who were they? What were they? And how deep did that lake really go? I got up around 3 a.m. and went to the park library, a small collection of records and research papers housed in one of the administrative buildings. I started searching for anything from 1952, any mention of diving expeditions or depth surveys. It took me 2 hours, but I finally found it. A single file, thin and marked with a red stamp that said, "Archived, do not remove." Inside were 3 pages, a brief report from December 1952 detailing an exploratory diving expedition conducted by a team from the U.S. Navy. The team had consisted of 4 divers, all experienced, all trained in deep-water operations. They'd descended to verify the lake's depth and to investigate anomalous sonar readings that suggested the lakebed might have underwater caves or geological formations. The report was clinical, detailing equipment used, descent rates, and initial observations. But the final paragraph made my blood run cold. At depth of 2,000 feet, team reported unexpected findings. Communication became erratic. Last confirmed message at 2,100 feet indicated team was continuing descent to investigate lower chamber. Contact lost at 2,150 feet. Recovery operations initiated, but unsuccessful due to equipment limitations. Team members presumed lost. Area marked and flagged for future investigation. Recommend no further deep diving operations until better equipment and understanding available. 4 men had descended into Crater Lake in 1952 and never came back. They'd gone past 2,000 feet into that lower depth where Ellen and I had seen the bioluminescent lights, and they'd simply vanished. The file included one more thing, a photocopy of a handwritten note, presumably from one of the divers before the final descent. The handwriting was shaky, hurried. Something wrong with the lake. Bottom, not where charts say. Water below 2,000 feet different, warmer, different chemistry. Seeing lights that shouldn't be there. Commander says continue descent. God help us. I closed the file and sat there in the dark library, my hands trembling. Ellen and I had almost followed those men into whatever was below. If that rope hadn't broken, if we'd continued descending, would we have disappeared too? I should have walked away then. Should have closed the file, forgotten what I'd read, and requested a transfer back to Joshua Tree or anywhere else. But I couldn't, because now I knew the truth. Crater Lake was deeper than anyone admitted. Something lived in those depths, and in 1952, 4 men had died trying to explore it. The question was, what was I going to do about it? The answer came 3 days later when Chief Ranger Hayes called me into his office. "Tom, I've been reviewing Ellen's preliminary report from your dive. She's requesting authorization for a follow-up expedition with more advanced equipment and additional support divers. She wants to investigate the rope failure and verify some of the instrument readings. And what do you think, sir?" Hayes looked at me seriously. "I think Ellen is one of the best scientists I've ever worked with, but I also think she's too curious for her own good sometimes. What do you think? You were down there with her. I thought about those warning markers. I thought about the 1952 team. I thought about the lights rising from the depths. I think," I said carefully, "that we should be very, very careful about going back down there. But you think we should go? I think we need answers. And I think those answers are down there, past 2,000 feet, in whatever that lower depth is." Hayes nodded slowly. "I was afraid you'd say that. Because, despite every instinct telling me this is a bad idea, I agree. We need to know what's really down there. I've authorized Ellen's request. You'll dive again in 1 week. But Tom, if anything feels wrong, if you see anything dangerous, you abort immediately. No heroics, no pushing boundaries. Safety first, always. Yes, sir. As I left his office, I felt a mix of excitement and dread. We were going back down, back into the depths, back to where 4 men had disappeared 37 years ago. And somewhere far below the pristine blue surface of Crater Lake, in depths that shouldn't exist, something bioluminescent and impossible was waiting. The week leading up to our second dive was consumed by preparation and research. Ellen and I spent hours reviewing the 1952 file, analyzing every detail of that doomed expedition. The Navy team had used equipment that was cutting edge for the time, but primitive by modern standards. Their gas mixtures were rudimentary, their depth gauges mechanical and unreliable. If they had found something down there, they wouldn't have had the technology to properly document it. We would be different. Ellen arranged for advanced mixed gas equipment, high-resolution cameras, and most importantly, a new type of ROV, a remotely operated vehicle that could descend to depths far beyond what humans could safely reach. If we couldn't go deeper ourselves, we could at least send the ROV to explore. I've been thinking about those bioluminescent lights, Ellen said, as we tested the equipment. The water temperature and chemistry down there should make bioluminescence impossible. But what if the environment below 2,000 feet is completely different? What if there's a thermocline we didn't detect, or a layer of warmer water? The 1952 diver's note mentioned that. He said the water below 2,000 feet was warmer, different chemistry. Exactly, which means there might be a separate body of water down there, heated by geothermal activity from the volcanic system. It could have its own ecosystem, completely isolated from the upper lake. I thought about the rope continuing down into darkness, about the lights rising to meet us. Ellen, what if this hidden lake is deeper than we can imagine? What if Crater Lake isn't just deep, but impossibly deep? She looked at me seriously. Then we're about to discover something that changes everything we know about this place. 3 days before the dive, I received an unexpected visitor at my ranger station. He was an old man, probably in his 70s, with white hair and weathered skin. He introduced himself as Jerry Holcomb, a retired ranger who'd worked at Crater Lake from 1950 to 1975. "I heard you've been asking about the 1952 team," he said, settling into a chair with the careful movements of someone whose body had begun to betray him. "I was here when it happened. I was just a junior ranger, barely 20 years old, but I remember everything about that day." "You were here?" I leaned forward. "What can you tell me about it?" Jerry's eyes grew distant. "They were Navy divers, like the file says. But what the file doesn't mention is why they were really here. It wasn't just a routine depth survey. They were looking for something specific." "What do you mean?" "In 1951, a year before the dive, there was an incident. A fishing boat, unauthorized, managed to get onto the lake in the middle of the night. Park hadn't quite instituted all the security measures we have now. The boat was found the next morning, empty, floating near the center of the lake. The 2 men aboard were gone, vanished without a trace." "Did they drown?" "That's what the official report said. But one of my supervisors, a man named Thomas Brennan, he told me something different. He said that before the boat was found, other rangers had reported seeing lights in the water. Blue-green lights moving beneath the surface, patterns that looked almost intentional. Brennan was convinced something in the lake had taken those men." My skin prickled. "The bioluminescent lights. You've seen them." It wasn't a question. "Yes, at 2,000 feet, maybe deeper. Jerry nodded slowly. The Navy came because Brennan convinced someone important that the lake was hiding something dangerous. They descended with orders to find out what was down there and neutralize it if necessary. They carried explosives, Tom. They were going to blow up whatever they found. But they never came back. No, and after that the Park Service buried the whole thing. Classified the report, discouraged any deep diving, and that was that. But I'll tell you something else. In the years after 1952, I dove in that lake dozens of times. Routine maintenance and survey work, never deeper than 500 feet. And sometimes, late at night when the water was perfectly still, I'd see flashes of light from the depths. Brief, quick, like lightning underwater. Whatever's down there, it's still there, and it's been there for a very long time. Why are you telling me this? Jerry stood up, his movements stiff. Because you're going back down. I can see it in your eyes. Same look those Navy divers had. And I want you to know what you're walking into. Those men didn't just die, Tom. They were taken. And if you go deep enough, you might be taken too. After he left, I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at the map of Crater Lake on my wall. The lake looked so simple on paper, a blue circle in a mountain crater, but I knew now that the truth was far more complex. Beneath that blue surface lay depths unmeasured, ecosystems unknown, and something that had been pulling people down for at least 40 years. The day of the dive arrived cold and overcast, snow flurries dancing in the November wind. Ellen and I met at Wizard Island, along with a support team of 6 people, including 2 additional safety divers who would remain at shallower depths in case of emergency. We'd planned this dive meticulously. We would descend to 2,000 feet as before, but this time we'd deploy the ROV and send it deeper while we monitored from a safer position. The ROV was equipped with high-definition cameras, sonar, and sampling equipment. Whatever was down there, we'd document it properly. "Weather's getting worse," one of the support team said, eyeing the darkening sky. "Storm's supposed to move in this afternoon." "We'll be done by then," Ellen said, checking her equipment one final time. "Tom, you ready?" I looked at the water, that impossible blue even under gray skies, and nodded. Let's find out what's really down there. The descent was smoother this time. We'd learned from the first dive, adjusted our procedures, improved our equipment. At 1,000 feet, everything was going perfectly. At 1,500 feet, we passed through the thermocline and entered the deeper, colder water. At 1,800 feet, we found the marker again. 1,800 feet, 1952. In the better light from our improved equipment, I could see more details. The marker wasn't just corroded, it was damaged, as if something had clawed at it, leaving deep scratches in the metal. "Ellen, look at these marks." She examined them through her camera. "Those aren't from corrosion. Something made those scratches. Something with considerable force." At 1,900 feet, we reached the second marker with its ominous message, "Do not proceed," and beneath it, scratched into the metal, "They are below." "We're deploying the ROV here," Ellen said. "This is as deep as I want to go personally. Let the machine do the dangerous work." We anchored ourselves to a rock outcropping and prepared the ROV, a sleek device about the size of a small car. Ellen controlled it via a fiber optic cable that would allow us to see everything it saw in real time. The display screen mounted on her equipment showed the ROV's camera view as it powered up. "ROV deployed," Ellen said. "Beginning descent. Current depth, 1,900 feet. Descending at 50 feet per minute." I watched the screen as the ROV dropped below us, its lights cutting through the darkness. At 1,950 feet, the water began to change. It was subtle at first, but unmistakable. The deep blue shifted to something else, something with a faint greenish tint. Temperature increasing, Ellen reported. Water chemistry changing. Higher mineral content, different pH. Tom, I think we've found the thermocline between the upper and lower lake. At 2,000 feet, the ROV's lights illuminated something that made my breath catch. The bottom. Not the bottom of Crater Lake as we knew it, but a bottom nonetheless. A rocky ceiling, porous and volcanic, stretching out in all directions. "That's impossible," Ellen whispered. "That shouldn't be there." But it was there, and as the ROV descended past it, we realized what we were seeing. Crater Lake didn't have a bottom at 1943 feet. It had a ceiling. Below that ceiling was something else entirely, a second body of water hidden beneath the first. "We're through," Ellen said. ROV is now in the lower chamber, depth 2,100 feet from surface, temperature significantly warmer, 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Water is no longer fresh, showing high mineral and sulfur content. This is geothermal water, Tom, heated by the volcanic system and trapped under that rock ceiling. The ROV's camera panned across an alien landscape. The walls of this lower chamber were smooth volcanic glass, black and reflective. Strange formations jutted from the floor, not stalagmites, but something organic-looking like massive coral or petrified wood. And then we saw them. The lights. They appeared at the edge of the ROV's illumination, dozens of them, floating in the water like underwater fireflies. As the camera focused, I could see they weren't just points of light. They were creatures, each one about the size of a basketball, translucent bodies pulsing with bioluminescence. "Dear God," Ellen breathed. "They're beautiful." They were. They moved with graceful, coordinated precision, swirling around the ROV in patterns that seemed almost choreographed. As we watched, more appeared, hundreds of them, filling the water with blue-green light. "Are they studying the ROV?" I asked. "I think so. Look at the pattern. They're swimming in a spiral, examining it from every angle. This is intelligent behavior, Tom. These things are curious." The ROV descended deeper, and the creatures followed, maintaining their distance but never leaving. At 2,500 feet, the sonar picked up something massive ahead. "What is that?" Ellen adjusted the ROV's heading toward the sonar contact. The camera revealed a structure. Not a natural formation, but something clearly artificial. Metallic, rusted, covered in mineral deposits but unmistakably man-made. As the ROV got closer, details emerged. It was equipment, diving equipment, but old from another era. "That's from the 1952 expedition," I said. "That's their gear." Ellen maneuvered the ROV around the debris field. More equipment appeared. Tanks, regulators, a diving helmet with the faceplate shattered. And then, partially buried in sediment, something that made my stomach turn. A skeleton. It was still wearing the remains of a diving suit, the body perfectly preserved in the cold mineral water. The skull was turned upward, as if looking toward the ceiling 2,000 feet above, toward the surface they'd never reached. "We need to recover that," Ellen said quietly. "Those men deserve a proper burial." "Ellen, we're at 2,500 feet. How deep does this go?" She checked the ROV's readings. "Sonar isn't finding a bottom yet." This lower lake could be as deep or deeper than the upper one. We could be looking at 4,000 feet or more. The bioluminescent creatures had moved away from the ROV, gathering in the distance. Their lights began to pulse in unison, and the pattern was unmistakable. They were communicating, or warning, or calling to something. "Ellen, bring the ROV back, now." "Tom, we're fine. We're getting incredible data. Just a little further." The sonar alarm went off. Something big was moving, rising from the depths below. Something much, much larger than the bioluminescent creatures. "Ellen, abort. Bring it back." She reversed the ROV, but whatever was rising was moving fast. On the screen, we watched as a massive shape emerged from the darkness, too large for the camera to capture in full. I caught glimpses. A body covered in the same bioluminescent markers, but these weren't cute floating spheres. This was something else. Something with appendages and mass and clear intentionality. The ROV's camera flickered as the creature brushed against it. For just a moment, I saw what looked like an eye, massive and intelligent, focusing on the camera with unmistakable awareness. Then the fiber optic cable went dead. "We lost it," Ellen said, her voice shaking. "Something severed the cable. We need to ascend. Now." We unclipped from our anchor and began swimming upward, our lights showing nothing but empty water around us. The bioluminescent creatures were gone. The massive presence we'd seen on the camera was gone. But I could feel it, that sensation of being watched, of something huge and aware tracking our movements. At 2,000 feet, we passed back through the ceiling, back into the cooler, cleaner water of the upper lake. I looked down and saw lights below us, thousands of them, pressed against that rocky barrier like prisoners looking out through bars. "They're trapped down there," I said. "That ceiling is trapping them in the lower lake." "Or protecting us from them," Ellen replied. We continued our ascent, following proper decompression stops, every minute feeling like an hour. At 1,000 feet, Ellen grabbed my arm and pointed down. A crack had appeared in the ceiling. Not large, maybe 2 feet wide, but unmistakable. And through that crack, bioluminescent creatures were emerging, squeezing through into the upper lake, their lights dimming as they encountered the colder, less mineral-rich water. "The ceiling is breaking," Ellen said. "Whatever's keeping them separated, it's failing." We ascended faster, our decompression schedule be damned. When we broke the surface, the storm had arrived, snow falling thick and fast, waves chopping across the lake's surface. The support team pulled us into the boat, everyone talking at once, asking questions about the ROV, about what we'd seen. Ellen and I looked at each other, and I saw my own fear reflected in her eyes. "We need to talk to Chief Hayes," she said. "Right now." Back at the research station, we showed Hayes everything. The camera footage from before we lost the ROV, the sonar data, the temperature and chemical readings. We told him about the lower lake, about the creatures, about the crack in the ceiling. Hayes listened to it all, his face growing graver with each detail. When we finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "This changes everything," he finally said. "If what you're telling me is true, Crater Lake isn't what we thought it was. It's not just a lake, it's a lid covering something that's been trapped down there for thousands of years. Since the volcano collapsed," Ellen said. "When Mount Mazama erupted, it must have created this lower chamber, filled it with geothermal water from the volcanic system, and then sealed it off, when the crater filled with fresh water from above. Whatever's down there has been isolated for 7,000 years. And now the seal is breaking," I added. "Those creatures are getting through. If that crack widens, if more of them escape into the upper lake, we don't know what they'll do," Hayes finished. "We don't know if they're dangerous or harmless. We don't know how many there are or how large they get. We need more information, and we need it fast." "What about the 1952 team?" Ellen asked. "We found one of their bodies. They made it down to the lower lake. If we can recover their equipment, their cameras, maybe they documented something that can help us understand what we're dealing with." Hayes shook his head. "That would require another dive, even deeper than before. After what you just experienced, I can't authorize that. It's too dangerous." Then we're blind, Ellen said. We can't study what we can't observe. The ROV is gone. We need to go back down. No, Hayes said firmly. I'm closing the lake to all diving operations until we can assess the situation properly. I'll contact the USGS, get additional resources, maybe even bring in the Navy again. But no more dives, not until we understand what we're dealing with. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that massive eye looking through the camera, kept thinking about the crack in the ceiling, kept wondering what would happen if that barrier collapsed completely. Around midnight, I gave up on sleep and went to the research station. Ellen was there, sitting in the dark, watching footage from the dive on her computer. Couldn't sleep either, I asked. Look at this. She rewound the footage to the moment before we lost the ROV. Right here, just before the cable was severed. Do you see it? I leaned in. In the corner of the frame, barely visible in the darkness, was something that looked like a structure. Not natural, not equipment from the 1952 expedition, but something else, something architectural. What is that? I don't know, but Tom, I think there's more down there than just creatures. I think there might be ruins, or artifacts, or evidence of something we never imagined. Ellen, Hayes said no more dives. I know what he said. She looked at me with determined eyes. But you and I both know we're going back down. We have to. Because if that ceiling collapses completely, whatever's down there will be free in the upper lake, and then eventually it could spread through the seepage into groundwater systems, into rivers, into the ocean. We need to understand what we're dealing with before that happens. She was right. I knew she was right. But I also remembered Jerry Holcomb's warning. Those men didn't just die. They were taken. When? I asked. Tomorrow night, after the storm passes. We'll tell Hayes it's an emergency equipment recovery, diving down to salvage what we can before the weather gets worse. We get down to the lower lake, we document everything we can, and we get out. 2 hours, maximum. This is insane. I know. But it's necessary. I should have said no, should have refused, followed regulations, waited for proper authorization and support. But Ellen was right. We were running out of time. Okay, I said. Tomorrow night. But Ellen, if anything goes wrong, we abort immediately. No heroics. Agreed. As I left the research station and walked back through the snow to my cabin, I looked out at Crater Lake. Even in the darkness, even under storm clouds, the water seemed to glow with that impossible blue. But now I knew what lay beneath that beauty. A hidden lake, warm and alien, filled with creatures that had been trapped for millennia. And somewhere in those depths, something massive was waiting. The storm passed by morning, leaving Crater Lake crystalline and calm, the surface like polished glass reflecting gray skies. Ellen and I spent the day preparing in secret, gathering equipment under the pretense of routine maintenance. Chief Hayes was away at a meeting in Portland, which gave us the window we needed. By 7 p.m., we were ready. We'd recruited one person we could trust, David Chen, a support diver who'd been on our previous expedition. When we told him what we'd found and what we planned to do, he didn't hesitate. Someone needs to document this, he said simply. If something happens to you two down there, someone needs to know the truth. We launched from Wizard Island under the cover of darkness. No lights except what was absolutely necessary. The lake was so still it felt like we were floating on black glass. Looking down into that water, knowing what lay beneath, made my skin crawl. Last chance to back out, Ellen said as we prepared to descend. I'm not backing out. But Ellen, promise me something. If we find those ruins you saw in the footage, we document them and leave. We don't try to investigate further. We don't take risks. I promise. The descent was faster this time, our familiarity with the depths giving us confidence we probably shouldn't have had. At 1,500 feet, I noticed something different. The water had a shimmer to it, like heat waves, and small pieces of debris floated past us, mineral deposits or sediment from below. "The crack is widening," Ellen said. "Material from the lower lake is leaking through." At 1,900 feet, we reached the warning marker. The scratches on it seemed deeper now, fresher, as if something had been clawing at it recently. And when I shone my light downward, I could see them, bioluminescent creatures, dozens of them, hovering just below the ceiling, their lights pulsing in that same coordinated pattern. "They're waiting for us," I said, "or warning us." We descended through the ceiling at 2,000 feet, and the sensation was immediate and disorienting. The water changed texture, became thicker, warmer. The blue of Crater Lake gave way to the greenish tint of the geothermal water, and all around us, the bioluminescent creatures watched, their lights creating an underwater galaxy. "Depth 2,100 feet, Ellen reported. "Temperature 74 degrees and rising. We're in the lower lake. We descended slowly, cautiously, our lights revealing more of this alien environment. The walls were smooth volcanic glass, but covered in something organic, a thin film of growth that looked almost like lichen, but moved slightly in the water current. The formations we'd seen on the ROV footage were everywhere, towering pillars of what looked like coral, but had a metallic sheen. At 2,300 feet, we found more equipment from the 1952 expedition. A diving helmet, perfectly preserved. A tank with the date stamped on it, 1952. And something else, something that made me freeze in the water. A camera. Old, waterproof housing, corroded but intact. The 1952 team had documented their descent. "Ellen, we need to recover that camera." "Agreed. But carefully. If there's film inside, we need to preserve it." She carefully detached the camera from where it had settled in the sediment. As she did, something caught in her light, further down the slope, the structure we'd seen in the ROV footage. We descended toward it, the bioluminescent creatures parting before us like a curtain. And as we got closer, the truth became clear. It was a building, or what remained of one. Carved directly into the volcanic glass of the chamber wall, with pillars and archways and geometric patterns that were definitely not natural. The style was unlike anything I'd ever seen, angular and precise, with symbols etched into every surface. "This is impossible," Ellen whispered through the comm. "This is thousands of feet underwater, in a chamber that's been sealed for 7,000 years. How could anyone build this? Maybe it wasn't built recently. Maybe it's older than the lake itself." We swam closer, and I could see that the structure extended far into the rock, a vast complex of rooms and corridors carved into the chamber wall. The entrance was a large archway, perfectly preserved, with more of those strange symbols carved around it. "We should document this and leave," I said, even as curiosity pulled me forward. "Just the entrance," Ellen said. "We'll photograph the exterior and go." But as we approached the archway, the bioluminescent creatures reacted. They surged forward, surrounding us, their lights pulsing frantically. The coordinated pattern was gone, replaced by what could only be described as panic. "They're trying to warn us," I said. "They don't want us to go in there. Or they don't want something in there to come out." From inside the structure, from deep within the carved corridors, a light appeared. Not bioluminescence, but something else. Something brighter, whiter, more intense. And it was moving toward us. "Swim," Ellen said. "Now." We kicked backward, away from the archway, but the light was fast. It emerged from the structure, and I caught a glimpse of what carried it. Not a creature like the bioluminescent spheres, but something humanoid, something that moved with purpose and intelligence. It stopped at the entrance, as if there was an invisible barrier it couldn't cross. The light it carried, some kind of bioluminescent organ or tool, illuminated a face that was almost human, but wrong. The proportions were off, the eyes too large, the skin translucent and pale. Ellen grabbed my arm, pulling me away. "Tom, we need to get out of here, right now." We ascended quickly, too quickly, passing back through the ceiling into the cooler water of Crater Lake. Behind us, the bioluminescent creatures had formed a wall, blocking the gap we'd come through, as if protecting the upper lake from whatever was below. At 1,500 feet, Ellen stopped abruptly. "Tom, look at your depth gauge." I checked it. It showed 2,000 feet, but that couldn't be right. We'd just passed through 1,500 feet seconds ago. "The gauges are malfunctioning," I said. "Or time is wrong down here. Tom, I think we've been underwater much longer than we think." I checked my dive watch. According to it, we'd been down for 8 hours. But that was impossible. We'd descended less than 2 hours ago. "We need to surface," Ellen said. "We need to decompress properly, or we'll get the bends." We spent the next 3 hours ascending, making careful stops at each decompression level, using the time to process what we'd seen. Ancient structures, humanoid figures, time dilation. None of it should have been possible, but we'd witnessed it all. When we finally broke the surface, the sun was rising. Not setting, rising. We'd entered the water at 7 p.m. and surfaced at 6 a.m. 11 hours underwater, though our gauges and our memories said it had been less than 3. David Chen was frantic in the support boat. "Where the hell have you been?" I was about to call for rescue. "You've been down there all night." "All night?" Ellen looked at her dive computer. "David, according to our equipment, we were only down for 2 hours. Then your equipment is broken, because I've been sitting in this boat for 11 hours, watching your bubbles and praying you'd come back up." We returned to shore, exhausted and disoriented. The time dilation was one thing, but the structures, the humanoid figure, the creatures acting as guardians, it all pointed to something far more complex than we'd imagined. Back at the research station, we reviewed the footage from our helmet cameras. The video confirmed everything we'd seen: the ruins, the figure in the archway, the panicked response of the bioluminescent creatures, and we had the camera from the 1952 expedition. Ellen carefully opened the waterproof housing. Inside, the film canister was intact, preserved by the cold water and the sealed container. We sent it to a specialist lab in Seattle, one that could process old film stock. The results came back 3 days later. The film had survived, and what it showed changed everything. The 1952 team had made it deeper than we thought. Much deeper. Their footage showed them descending past the structures we'd found, down to what looked like the true bottom of the lower lake at 4,500 feet. And at the bottom they'd found more than ruins. They'd found people, or what had once been people. Dozens of humanoid figures living in a complex of structures, using the bioluminescent creatures as light sources, farming some kind of algae or fungus on the walls. The figures had noticed the divers and approached, not hostile, but curious. The final frames of the film showed the divers trying to communicate. One of them removing his regulator to speak. The humanoid figures had surrounded them, touching their equipment, examining their diving suits with fascination. Then the film ended. But we knew what had happened next. The divers had never returned. They'd either run out of air or been kept below, or something else had occurred. Their bodies were down there, in that colony at 4,500 feet, preserved in the cold mineral water. "They're not monsters," Ellen said, as we watched the footage for the 10th time. They're survivors. When Mount Mazama erupted 7,000 years ago, when the mountain collapsed and the crater filled with water, some people were trapped below. They adapted, evolved, learned to live in the darkness and the heat. They've been down there for millennia, cut off from the surface world. And now the ceiling is breaking, I said. Their prison is opening. Or our protection is failing. If they reach the upper lake, if they spread beyond Crater Lake, what happens then? They've been isolated for 7,000 years. What diseases might they carry? What effect would they have on the ecosystem? Chief Hayes was back from Portland by then, and we had to show him everything. He watched the footage in silence, his face unreadable. When it ended, he sat back in his chair and rubbed his temples. "This is beyond the Park Service," he said. "This is beyond anything we're equipped to handle. I need to contact the federal government, the CDC, the military. If what you're saying is true, this is a matter of national security." "What about the people down there?" Ellen asked. "They're human, or they were once. Don't they have rights?" "They're also potentially dangerous," Hayes countered. "We don't know their intentions, their capabilities, or their numbers. Until we do, we have to treat this as a containment situation." "You want to seal them in?" I asked. "I want to prevent a disaster. If that ceiling collapses completely, if these beings reach the surface, we could be looking at an epidemic, an environmental catastrophe, or worse. We need to stabilize that ceiling, reinforce it, make sure nothing gets through." "And if that's not possible?" Ellen asked. "If the geological forces are too strong, if the ceiling is going to collapse no matter what we do?" Hayes looked at both of us with serious eyes. "Then we'll have to consider more extreme measures." I understood what he was implying. If the ceiling couldn't be reinforced, if containment failed, they would destroy the entire lower lake. Seal it permanently, even if that meant killing everything down there. "We can't do that," I said. "Those are people. They've survived for 7,000 years. We can't just eliminate them because they're inconvenient." "I'm not making any decisions yet," Hayes said. "But I need you both to understand the stakes. This isn't just about scientific discovery. This is about protecting millions of people from an unknown threat." That night, I returned to my cabin to find someone waiting for me. Jerry Holcomb, the retired ranger, sitting on my porch in the darkness. "You found them," he said. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "Because I found them too. In 1972, I went down there past the warning markers, past the ceiling. I saw the structures, the people, everything, and I made the same mistake you're making now." "What mistake?" "Thinking you can control this, thinking you can make the right choice. The truth is, Tom, there is no right choice. Those people below, they've been prisoners for 7,000 years. They deserve freedom. But the world above isn't ready for them, and they aren't ready for the world. If they reach the surface, both sides will suffer." "So what did you do?" "I did nothing. I left them alone, reported that I found nothing of interest, and spent the next 20 years hoping the ceiling would hold. But it's not going to hold forever, and now that you've disturbed things, it's breaking faster." "What do you mean, we disturbed things?" "Every time you dive down there, every time you send equipment, every time you interact with them, you weaken the barrier, not just physically, but spiritually. That ceiling isn't just rock, Tom. It's been reinforced by time, by isolation, by the simple fact that both sides forgot the other existed. You're making them remember." Jerry stood up, moving with that careful old man shuffle. "You have a choice to make. Close that gap while you still can, or watch as two worlds collide. Neither option is good, but one is survivable." He left me there in the dark. his words echoing in my head. The next morning, I woke to sirens. Emergency vehicles were racing toward the lake rim. I grabbed my radio and called in. "What's happening?" The dispatcher's voice was panicked. "The lake, Tom." "Something's wrong with the lake. Get down here now." I drove to the rim overlook and saw what had caused the alarm. The water was glowing, not the normal blue, but bright green, the color of the bioluminescent creatures. The entire lake, all 20 square miles of it, glowing like an emerald in the dawn light. Ellen was already there, along with Hayes and a dozen other rangers. We stood at the rim, watching in awe and horror as the glow pulsed and shifted, patterns moving across the surface like waves. "The ceiling collapsed," Ellen said quietly. "They're all coming through." The entire lower lake is emptying into the upper lake. "How many of them?" Hayes asked. "Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. We only saw a few, but if there's a whole civilization down there." Below us, boats on the lake were being evacuated, tourists and researchers fleeing the phenomenon, and as we watched, shapes began to surface. The bioluminescent creatures, hundreds of them, rising from the depths and floating on the surface like flowers, and among them, other shapes. Humanoid figures swimming in the shallow water, touching the sunlight for the first time in 7,000 years. "Hayes, what do we do?" I asked. He looked at me with an expression of complete helplessness. "I have no idea." The glow lasted for 3 days. 3 days during which Crater Lake transformed from a pristine natural wonder into something alien and unknowable. The bioluminescent creatures filled the upper lake, turning the water into a luminous green sea. And the humanoid figures, the descendants of those trapped 7,000 years ago, surfaced by the dozens. The federal government responded with remarkable speed. By the second day, the entire park was quarantined. Military personnel established a perimeter around the lake, and scientists from the CDC, USGS, and various other agencies descended on the research station. Ellen and I spent hours being debriefed, showing our footage, explaining everything we'd found. But I noticed something in those meetings. The officials weren't surprised. They were concerned, yes, and they scrambled to contain the situation, but they weren't shocked. It was as if they'd been expecting this, or something like it. On the third night, I confronted Jerry Holcomb, who'd been brought in as a consultant due to his historical knowledge. "You knew this would happen," I said. "When you warned me, you knew the ceiling was going to collapse." Jerry looked at me with tired eyes. "I knew it was a possibility every time someone went down there. Every time someone disturbed the equilibrium, the risk increased. But Tom, you need to understand something. This was always going to happen eventually. The ceiling was never permanent. It was just buying time." "Time for what?" "For them to forget about us, and for us to forget about them." But memory is persistent. Those people down there, they kept stories of the surface, and we kept legends of things beneath Crater Lake. The forgetting never quite took hold. The next morning, Hayes called Ellen and me into a meeting with the federal officials. The lead representative, a woman named Dr. Sarah Martinez from some agency whose acronym I didn't recognize, got straight to the point. "We need to establish communication with the surface dwellers," she said. "We need to know their intentions, their capabilities, and their numbers. You two have been closer to them than anyone else. We want you to make contact." "Contact how?" Ellen asked. "A dive. You'll go down with translation equipment, cameras, and a team of specialists. We'll document everything and hopefully establish some form of dialogue." "And if they're hostile," I asked, "then we'll know what we're dealing with and respond accordingly." Ellen and I exchanged glances. This was what we'd wanted, wasn't it? A chance to understand, to learn, to bridge the gap between two worlds. But after everything we'd seen, I wasn't sure either world was ready for that bridge. The dive was scheduled for the next day. Our team consisted of 6 people: Ellen and me, 2 military divers, a linguist named Dr. Robert Chen, and a cultural anthropologist, Dr. Amanda Pierce. We were equipped with the best diving technology available, including rebreathers that would allow us to stay underwater for extended periods and communication equipment that could potentially translate unknown languages. We descended at noon, the sunlight penetrating the now green water in shafts of emerald light. The bioluminescent creatures had settled throughout the lake, creating layers of living light at different depths. It was beautiful and eerie simultaneously. At 1,000 feet, we encountered the first of the surface dwellers in the upper lake. There were 5 of them, swimming together, their pale, translucent skin almost glowing in the filtered light. When they saw us, they stopped, hovering in the water with a grace that human swimmers could never match. Dr. Chen activated the translation device, which would analyze any sounds or gestures and attempt to find patterns. He made a simple gesture, hand to chest, then extending outward. Friend. The beings watched, their large eyes unblinking. Then one of them mimicked the gesture, hand to chest, then extending toward us. Dr. Chen smiled inside his mask. They understand the concept. That's a start. We continued descending, and more of the surface dwellers appeared, following us with obvious curiosity. By the time we reached 2,000 feet and passed through what remained of the ceiling, we had an escort of 20 beings. The lower lake was changed. The water was cooler now, mixing with the fresh water from above, and many of the geothermal vents seemed less active. The structures we'd found were still there, but now we could see more of them. An entire city carved into the volcanic glass, extending far into the distance. And at the entrance to that city, dozens more of the beings waited, but these were different. They wore garments made from some kind of woven material, carried tools, and had markings on their skin that might have been tattoos or natural pigmentation patterns. One of them swam forward, clearly a leader or representative. Dr. Chen tried the translation device again, speaking slowly. We come in peace. We want to understand. The being tilted its head, studying us. Then it opened its mouth and made sounds. Not words I could understand, but definitely language. The translation device whirred, analyzing, processing. After a moment, a mechanical voice spoke through our headsets. Surface, returned, long waiting, sky people, memory old. It wasn't perfect translation, but it was enough. These beings remembered the surface, remembered when their ancestors had lived above, and they'd been waiting for a return. Dr. Pierce moved forward, making gestures indicating the structures around us. Your home? Your city? The being gestured more broadly to all of the lower lake. The translation device parsed the sounds. Prison became home. Home became us. Us became water. Over the next hour, through halting translation and gesture, we learned their story. When Mount Mazama erupted, a portion of the tribe that lived on the mountain was trapped in caves as the mountain collapsed. The caves filled with geothermal water, hot and mineral-rich. Some died immediately. Others adapted, their bodies changing over generations to survive in the darkness and heat. They'd survived by farming the algae and fungi, by breeding the bioluminescent creatures for light, by carving homes into the volcanic glass. They'd created a civilization in the depths, complete with art, culture, and oral histories of the sky they'd lost. But they'd never forgotten. Generation after generation, they'd passed down stories of the surface, of wind and stars and growing things, and they'd mark the passage of time with those metal plates, the depth markers we'd found. Each generation adding a new marker as the water level above them slowly rose. "They want to return to the surface," Dr. Chen said as we reviewed the translation. "But they're afraid. They know they're different now. They don't know if they can survive up there or if they'll be accepted." "They're right to be afraid," one of the military divers said. "If they surface, there'll be panic. People will see them as monsters." "They're not monsters," Ellen said firmly. "They're people who survived impossible circumstances. They deserve a chance." As we debated, I noticed the leader being watching me. It swam closer, reaching out slowly. I held still as it touched my face mask, its fingers delicate and careful. Then it made more sounds, and the translation device struggled with the meaning. "You, brought down, brought up, opened door, broke prison, freed us, or doomed us." The question hit me like a physical blow. Had we freed them, or had we doomed them? By investigating, by disturbing the equilibrium, had we done good or harm? I didn't have an answer. We spent another hour in the lower lake, documenting, learning, trying to understand. But eventually, our air supplies forced us to ascend. As we left, the beings didn't try to stop us. They simply watched, and I had the sense that they were waiting to see what we would do with the knowledge we'd gained. The debrief back at the research station lasted well into the night. Dr. Martinez and her team had monitored everything through our cameras, and they'd brought in more specialists to analyze the footage. "The question," Dr. Martinez said, "is what happens now. These beings can't stay in the lake indefinitely. The mixing of the waters, the change in temperature and chemistry will eventually make it uninhabitable for them. They'll have to surface or they'll die." "Then we help them surface," Ellen said. "We prepare the public. We create a controlled introduction. We can't." Dr. Martinez interrupted. "I've been in contact with Washington. The decision has been made. These beings represent too much of an unknown. Their biology, their potential diseases, their effect on the ecosystem, we can't risk it." "What are you saying?" I demanded. "I'm saying we're going to seal the lake. Permanently. We'll use controlled explosives to collapse the remaining sealing structure, trap them back in the lower chamber, and then introduce chemicals to make the water uninhabitable. It's the only way to ensure containment." "You're talking about genocide," Ellen said, her voice shaking with rage. "These are people, not specimens." "They have rights. They're not legally people," Dr. Martinez said coldly. "They're an unknown species that poses a potential threat. The decision is final." Ellen and I looked at each other, and I saw my own horror reflected in her eyes. We discovered something incredible, something that challenged everything we knew about human adaptation and survival. And the response was to destroy it. "When?" I asked quietly. 3 days. We're evacuating the area, establishing a larger perimeter, and bringing in the equipment. I'm sorry, but this is bigger than any of us." That night, Ellen and I met in secret with Dr. Chen and Dr. Pierce. Both scientists were equally horrified by the plan. "We can't let this happen," Dr. Pierce said. "These beings have survived for 7,000 years. They deserve better than extermination." "What can we do?" Ellen asked. "The military is involved now." "This is beyond us. We warn them," I said. "We go back down, and we warn them, give them a chance to, I don't know, hide deeper or defend themselves or something." "That's treason," Dr. Chen said. "We'd be arrested, imprisoned." "I don't care," I replied. "I'm not going to stand by and watch them die without at least warning them." Ellen nodded. "I'm in." whatever the consequences. We prepared for one final dive, taking equipment without authorization, planning to descend that very night. But as we were loading the boat at Wizard Island, we found we weren't alone. Jerry Holcomb stood at the water's edge, and behind him a dozen more people, former rangers, scientists, locals who'd heard rumors of what was happening. "We're not letting you do this alone," Jerry said. "If you're warning them, we're helping. You'll all be arrested. Then we'll be arrested together." Some things are more important than following orders. We descended as a group, our lights creating a constellation in the dark water. At the entrance to the lower lake city, the beings were waiting. They'd seen our preparations on the surface. Somehow, they knew what was coming. Through Dr. Chen's translation device, I explained what was planned. The leader being listened, its large eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, it made sounds that the device translated simply, "We know, always knew. Sky people fear difference, fear us." "I'm sorry," I said, though the translation device probably couldn't convey the depth of that apology. The being reached out and touched my hand. "You opened door, gave us sky again. Brief sky better than no sky. Thank you." Then it made a gesture to the others, and they began to swim upward. All of them, hundreds of beings rising toward the surface of Crater Lake. They were going to surface before they could be killed. They were choosing to face the unknown, rather than die trapped in their prison. We surfaced with them, emerging into the night air. The lake was filled with glowing beings, their bioluminescence turning the water into a field of stars. On the shore, military personnel scrambled, unsure what to do with this mass surfacing. The beings swam to the edges of the lake, touching land for the first time in 7,000 years. Some collapsed immediately, unable to handle the lower pressure and different atmosphere. Others stood on shaking legs, looking up at the actual sky, at the real stars. I watched as one of them, the leader I'd spoken to, stood at the water's edge. It raised its hands to the sky and made a sound that needed no translation. It was joy, pure and simple, the joy of freedom, even if that freedom would be brief. The military moved in, establishing a perimeter, but they didn't attack. How could they? These beings were clearly intelligent, clearly harmless, clearly just trying to survive. Dr. Martinez arrived, her face conflicted. "I've been overruled," she said quietly. "Someone in Washington saw the live footage. Saw them standing there looking at the stars. The order has been changed. We're to establish a reservation, a protected area where they can live and be studied. It's not perfect, but it's better than extermination." Ellen grabbed my hand, tears streaming down her face. "We did it." We actually did it. But as I watched the beings on the shore, watched them struggle to adapt to an environment their bodies no longer fully understood, I wasn't sure if we'd saved them or simply traded one prison for another. 3 months later, I stood at the edge of the Crater Lake Reservation, watching the beings who'd come to be called the Deep Ones by the media. Some had adapted to surface life. Others had returned to the lake, unable to survive in the thinner atmosphere and cooler temperatures. A few had died, victims of diseases their isolated immune systems couldn't handle, or simply from the shock of the change. But most survived, and slowly, carefully, they were learning to live in a world that had moved on without them for 7,000 years. Ellen came to stand beside me. She'd left the Park Service, taking a position with the new research facility dedicated to studying and protecting the Deep Ones. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked. I thought about that leader being, the one who'd touched the sky and felt joy, even knowing it might kill them. "I think we gave them a choice. That's all we could do." "The lake is different now," Ellen said. "The lower chamber is empty. The geothermal vents are sealing over. In a few years, it'll just be a normal lake again." "Normal," I repeated. "I don't think Crater Lake will ever be normal again. Too many people know what was down there. Too many secrets were revealed." "Good," Ellen said firmly. "Secrets are what kept them trapped for 7,000 years. Maybe it's time for fewer secrets." I thought about the depth markers, those metal plates warning divers not to proceed. Someone in 1952 had put them there, trying to protect future generations from what lay below. But protection and imprisonment are sometimes the same thing. As I watched the deep ones learning to walk on land, learning to speak with devices that translated their ancient tongue, learning to exist in a world that saw them as curiosities rather than people, I wondered if we'd truly freed them or simply brought them to a different kind of prison. But then one of them, a young one born in the depths who'd never seen the sun until 3 months ago, ran past me chasing a butterfly. Its face showed wonder and delight, emotions that transcended species and time. Maybe that was answer enough. I left Crater Lake shortly after, unable to stay in a place that held so many memories and so many what-ifs. The Park Service offered me positions elsewhere, but I declined. I was done with secrets, done with depths that went deeper than they should. But sometimes, late at night, I dream of that descent. I dream of passing through 2,000 feet and entering that warm, mineral-rich water. I dream of the bioluminescent creatures and the impossible city carved into volcanic glass. And I dream of that question the leader being asked me, freed us or doomed us. I still don't know the answer, maybe I never will. But I know this: we opened a door that had been sealed for 7,000 years, and what came through changed everything. Not just for the deep ones, but for us. We learned that adaptation can happen in the strangest places, that humanity can survive in the most impossible conditions, and that sometimes the deepest mysteries aren't beneath our feet but hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone curious enough or foolish enough to look. Crater Lake is still there. Still blue. Still beautiful. But if you dive deep enough, if you pass 2,000 feet and enter what remains of the lower chamber, you can still see the marks, the depth markers, the warnings, do not proceed, they are below. Except now, they're not below. They're here, among us, trying to build lives in a world that's both familiar and completely alien to them. And the lake keeps its secrets, even now. Because sometimes I wonder, was the lower chamber the only hidden place? Were the deep ones the only ones down there? Or are there other depths, other chambers, other species we haven't discovered yet? The markers only went to 2,500 feet. We found ruins at 4,500. But Crater Lake's true depth? I don't think anyone really knows. And maybe that's for the best. Some doors should stay closed. Some depths should remain unmeasured. Some mysteries should never be solved. But then again, we're human. Curiosity is in our nature. And somewhere, right now, someone is probably planning another dive, going deeper, looking for answers. I hope they're ready for what they find. I hope we all are.